Summer, 1943. The Eastern Front. A landscape of burned villages, shattered forests, and mass graves stretching for thousands of miles. For 2 years, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union have been locked in the most brutal conflict in human history. Over 10 million soldiers and civilians are already dead. Entire cities have been erased from the map. But the killing is far from over. Somewhere in western Russia, near a small city called Kursk, two empires are about to collide in a battle so massive, so destructive, that it will dwarf everything that came before. 6,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft, over 2 million soldiers. The largest tank battle ever fought. The last great German offensive on the Eastern Front. And the beginning of the end for Hitler's dream of conquest. In the summer of 1943, the world held its breath. Across the burning fields of the Eastern Front, a storm was gathering. A storm made of steel, fire, and iron will. After years of brutal fighting, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were preparing for a confrontation unlike anything the world had ever seen. And at the center of it all was a single, bulging front line stretching across western Russia, the Kursk salient. A bulge in the front lines, 150 miles wide and 100 miles deep, jutting westward into German-held territory. To the Germans, it was the perfect target. To the Soviets, it was the perfect trap. Hitler sees an opportunity. If he can cut off the salient at its base, he'll encircle and destroy hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. It will be another great victory, like the early days of Barbarossa. Stalin sees something else. He sees the Germans preparing an obvious attack on obvious terrain, and he plans to let them come straight into the most fortified killing ground ever created. This is the Battle of Kursk, where over 1 million men will fight, where tanks will collide at point-blank range in fields turned to dust and blood, where the fate of the Eastern Front and perhaps the entire war will be decided. The clash of the titans. To understand Kursk, we must first understand how the war reached this moment, and why this battle became inevitable. February 2nd, 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad ends with Germany's catastrophic defeat. The Sixth Army is annihilated. Field Marshal Paulus surrenders. For the first time since the war began, the myth of German invincibility is shattered. The Red Army, bloodied but victorious, doesn't stop. They launch a massive winter offensive, pushing westward, recapturing city after city. Kursk, Kharkov, Belgorod, all are liberated. The Germans are in retreat. Stalin believes the collapse of Army Group South is imminent. He orders his forces to keep advancing deep into Ukraine, toward the Dnieper River. But the Germans are not finished. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of Germany's most brilliant commanders, orchestrates a counterattack in March 1943. Using mobile warfare, the tactics Germany perfected in 1940, Manstein strikes the overextended Soviet spearheads. German panzer divisions smash into the Soviet flanks. Kharkov is recaptured. The Soviet offensive stalls. But the front line stabilizes in an unusual configuration. Around the city of Kursk, the front bulges westward, a salient 150 miles wide at its base, protruding 100 miles into German-held territory. This bulge becomes the focal point of both German and Soviet planning. Hitler looks at the map and sees opportunity. The salient is a tempting target, its flanks exposed, its base narrow. A pincer attack from north and south could cut it off, trapping hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. It would be another canny, another great encirclement. Operation Citadel is born. Hitler believed the battle would restore German dominance on the Eastern Front. But planning Operation Citadel becomes a source of conflict among Germany's military leadership. Some generals urge an immediate attack in April or early May, before the Soviets can prepare. But Hitler delays. He wants to wait for new weapons, the Tiger and Panther tanks, the Ferdinand tank destroyer. These vehicles, he believes, will give Germany an unstoppable advantage. The Tiger tank is a behemoth, 56 tons of armor and firepower, nearly impervious to most Soviet anti-tank weapons. Its 88mm gun can destroy any Soviet tank at long range. The Panther is Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34, fast, well-armored, with a powerful gun. The Ferdinand is a massive tank destroyer, heavily armored but slow and lacking a machine gun for close defense. Hitler is obsessed with these new weapons. He delays the offensive again and again, waiting for more to be delivered. But every delay gives the Soviets more time to prepare. He gathered the largest armored force the world had ever seen, thousands of tanks, including the fearsome Tigers and Panthers, supported by elite SS divisions. By July, Germany has assembled Army Group Center, north of the salient, commanded by Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, 9th Army, commanded by Colonel General Walter Model.
Over 460,000 menn.
1,200 tanks and assault guns, supported by Luftwaffe aircraft. Army Group South, south of the salient, commanded by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf.
Over 440,000 menn.
1,500 tanks and assault guns.
Includes Elite SS Divisions. Leibstandarte, das Reich, Totenkopf.
In total, nearly 900,000 German soldiers, 2,700 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft. Operation Citadel, he promised, would be the decisive blow that would crush the Red Army once and for all. Hitler addresses his commanders. This offensive is of decisive importance. It must succeed quickly and conclusively. Victory at Kursk must be a torch for the world. But some of his generals have doubts. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, warns that the new tanks are not ready, that the offensive is too predictable. Is it really necessary to attack Kursk? He asks Hitler. Hitler replies, the thought of this offensive turns my stomach, but he orders it anyway. But the Soviets were ready, because they knew it was coming. Soviet intelligence, scouts, and partisans watched every German movement. Soviet intelligence networks are among the best in the world. Spies in Germany, Switzerland, and elsewhere feed information to Moscow. Partisan forces behind German lines report every troop movement, every concentration of tanks and supplies. The British share intelligence from ultra-decrypted German communications. By late April, Soviet High Command knows the target, Kursk, the timing, sometime in early summer. The forces, massive armored thrusts from north and south. Stalin and his commanders prepared the battlefield with a scale of engineering never seen before. The defense of Kursk is entrusted to two fronts. Central Front, defending the northern face, commanded by General Konstantin Rokossovsky. Voronezh Front, defending the southern face, commanded by General Nikolai Vatutin. Behind them, as a strategic reserve, is the Steppe Front, commanded by General Ivan Konev, fresh armies ready to counterattack. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, Stalin's most trusted commander, coordinates the overall defense. The plan is simple but brilliant. Absorb the German attack in prepared defenses, bleed them white, then counterattack with overwhelming force. The Soviets build the most elaborate defensive system in military history. 8 defensive belts, one behind the other, stretching 120 miles deep. Each belt consists of thousands of miles of trenches, anti-tank ditches, layers of bunkers and firing positions, oceans of barbed wire, minefields so dense that in some areas there were 5 mines for every single meter of ground. In total, over 3,000 miles of trenches, 400,000 mines laid, tens of thousands of anti-tank guns, artillery pieces, and machine guns. Entire villages are fortified. Every hill becomes a strong point. Rivers and streams are turned into obstacles. It was not just a defensive line. It was a fortress the size of a country. Soviet soldiers dig for weeks. Civilians, men, women, children help build the defenses. Everyone knows what's at stake. Not one step back, Stalin had ordered at Stalingrad. The same spirit animates the defenders at Kursk. The Red Army assembles. Over 1.3 million soldiers, 3,600 tanks, 20,000 artillery pieces, 2,400 aircraft, plus Konev Steppe Front in reserve, another 500,000 men and 1,500 tanks. The Soviets will outnumber the Germans, but not overwhelmingly. The difference will be made by the defenses, and by will. July 4, 1943. Both armies are in position. The Germans are confident. Their new tanks are fearsome. Their elite SS divisions have never been defeated in open battle. They believe Soviet morale is shaky after the spring setbacks. The Soviets are determined. They have prepared for months. They know the attack is coming. They are ready. That night, Soviet intelligence reports that the German attack will begin at dawn, July 5th. Zhukov makes a bold decision, preemptive artillery strike. At 2:20 a.m., Soviet artillery opens fire on German assembly areas. Thousands of guns roar in the darkness. German soldiers, preparing for their own attack, are caught by surprise. Command posts are hit. Supply dumps explode. The Germans are shaken, but not stopped. Their attack will proceed. July 5, 1943. Dawn. On July 5, 1943, the earth trembled. The German assault began with a thunderous bombardment, followed by waves of tanks and infantry surging forward. Northern Sector, Model's 9th Army. General Model's forces attack from the north, driving south toward Kursk. Their objective: break through Rokossovsky's defenses and link up with Manstein's forces attacking from the south, encircling the salient. But from the first moments, the attack bogs down. The minefields are far denser than expected. German engineers work frantically to clear paths, but they're targeted by Soviet artillery. Tanks that make it through the minefields face waves of anti-tank guns, hidden, camouflaged, firing from prepared positions. Soviet infantry, dug into deep trenches, fight with fanatical determination. For the first time, the Germans faced an enemy that not only resisted but refused to break. The Germans advance, but slowly. Every mile costs hundreds of casualties. Every village becomes a battleground. The small town of Panayrai becomes a focal point of savage fighting. Panayrai is a railway junction. If the Germans capture it, they can push deeper toward Kursk. But Rokossovsky has heavily fortified it. The 307th Rifle Division defends Panayrai with everything they have. For days, Germans and Soviets fight house to house, street to street. Buildings change hands multiple times. The town is reduced to rubble. German Tigers and Ferdinands lumber forward, smashing through buildings, crushing Soviet positions. But they're ambushed by hidden anti-tank guns, Molotov cocktails, close assault teams. The Ferdinands, lacking machine guns for close defense, are vulnerable to Soviet infantry who climb on them and plant explosives. The battle for Panayrai rages for a week. When it finally ends, the Germans have gained only a few miles, at a cost of thousands of men and hundreds of tanks. Model realizes his offensive is failing. He cannot break through. Southern Sector, Manstein's 4th Panzer Army. The southern attack, led by Manstein, is more successful, but still far from what Hitler envisioned. Manstein's forces are stronger. The terrain is more open. His commanders, especially those leading the SS Panzer Corps, are aggressive and skilled. The Germans advance, smashing through the first defensive belt, then the second. Soviet defenders fight desperately, but the German armor is overwhelming. Tigers and Panthers carve through Soviet positions. Stukas scream down, bombing Soviet strongpoints. But the advance is costly. Every defensive belt takes time to penetrate. Soviet reserves move up, plugging gaps, launching counterattacks. Soviet anti-tank guns roared from hidden positions. Mines tore apart German armor before it even reached the first trench. The Germans encounter a new Soviet tactic, anti-tank pack fronts. Concentrations of dozens of anti-tank guns firing in coordinated salvos. A single German tank advancing might face fire from 10 or 20 guns simultaneously. Even Tigers are vulnerable to such concentrated fire. And everywhere, the Soviet soldiers fought with a desperation born from 2 years of invasion and suffering. By July 11th, Manstein's forces have penetrated about 25 miles into the Soviet defenses. They're approaching the village of Prokhorovka. Beyond it lies open terrain, the opportunity to break into the Soviet rear. But Zhukov and Vatutin have anticipated this. They're moving reinforcements to Prokhorovka. The 5th Guards Tank Army, commanded by General Pavel Rotmistrov, is racing toward Prokhorovka. Over 800 Soviet tanks. If they can reach Prokhorovka before the Germans break through, they can stop the offensive. On the morning of July 12th, the two armored forces collide. But the real clash was yet to come. At a small village called Prokhorovka, two massive armored armies collided in the largest tank battle in human history. July 12, 1943. Dawn. The fields around Prokhorovka are flat, open, dotted with small hills and gullies. Over 1,000 tanks roared into the fields at dawn, their engines shaking the ground like thunder. The German 2 SS Panzer Corps, Leibstandard, Das Reich, Totenkopf, deploys about 300 tanks and assault guns, including Tigers and Panthers. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, over 800 T-34s and other tanks, charges toward them. Rotmistrov knows his T-34s cannot match Tigers at long range. The Tiger's 88mm gun can destroy a T-34 at 2,000 meters. The T-34's 76mm gun needs to be much closer. So Rotmistrov orders a desperate tactic: charge. Close the distance. Get in among the German tanks where the Tiger's range advantage is nullified. Dust, smoke, and fire swallowed the sky. At such close range, the tanks didn't even bother with long-distance shots. They rammed, collided, and blasted each other at point-blank distance. The battlefield became a metallic hell. Tanks fire at each other from 100 meters, 50 meters, sometimes even closer. There's no time for careful aim. It's instinct, reflex, desperation. T-34s swarm the German tanks. Some are destroyed immediately, turrets blown off by Tiger cannons. But others get through, firing into the Tiger's thinner side and rear armor. German Tigers advanced with terrifying power, but they were slow. Soviet T-34s, faster, more maneuverable, swarmed them like angry hornets, firing from every direction, overwhelming them by sheer will and numbers. The chaos is absolute. Commanders lose control of their units. Radio communications break down. Individual tank crews fight their own battles, unaware of the larger picture. Tanks collide, unable to maneuver in the dense swirl of combat. Some crews abandon damaged tanks and continue fighting on foot. The air above the battlefield belonged to neither side.
Diva bombers straka doomward.
Anti-aircraft guns fired into the chaos. German Stukas dive on Soviet tanks. Soviet Il-2 Sturmovix attack German formations. Fighters dogfight overhead. Anti-aircraft fire fills the sky. Every second, another machine of war erupted in flames. The battle rages for hours. The heat is unbearable. Inside the tanks, temperatures exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Crews are exhausted, deafened, many wounded. By midday, both sides are spent. The Germans have held the field, technically. They've stopped the Soviet counterattack, but they've taken heavy losses. And critically, they have not broken through. By nightfall, the fields around Prokhorovka were littered with burning hulks of steel. Estimates of losses vary. The Soviets likely lost 300 to 400 tanks destroyed or damaged. The Germans lost fewer, perhaps 80 to 100 tanks, but these are irreplaceable, especially the Tigers and Panthers. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Prokhorovka stops the German offensive. Manstein cannot advance further. His forces are exhausted, his losses unsustainable. And the Soviets are not done. While the Germans bled themselves dry against the Kursk defenses, the Red Army prepared a massive counterattack. Fresh reserves, entire new armies, moved into position. Konev's steppe front, held in reserve, now moves forward. Hundreds of thousands of fresh troops, thousands of tanks. On July 12th, the same day as Prokhorovka, the Soviets launch Operation Kutuzov against the northern shoulder of the salient, targeting the Oral Bulge. The Germans, weakened by their failed offensive, cannot hold. Soviet forces drive deep into German positions. On July 13th, Hitler calls a meeting of his commanders. He informs them that the Allies have landed in Sicily. Italy is in danger. He needs to withdraw forces from the Eastern Front to defend Southern Europe. Operation Citadel is cancelled. Manstein protests. He argues that given more time, he can still achieve victory at Kursk. But Hitler is adamant. The offensive is over. When they struck, they hit with the force of an avalanche. On August 3rd, the Soviets launch Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev, named after an 18th-century Russian general, against the southern face of the salient. Voronezh and steppe fronts smash into German positions. The goal: recapture Kharkov and drive the Germans back across the Dnieper River. The Germans fight tenaciously, but they're outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. Belgorod is liberated on August 5th. Kharkov falls on August 23rd. For the first time in the war, Moscow fires a victory salute, artillery salvos celebrating the liberation of Soviet cities. For the first time in the war, the Germans had no reserves left to stop them. The great gamble of Operation Citadel was over, and Germany had lost. The Battle of Kursk lasted from July 5th to August 23rd, 1943. The casualties were staggering. Soviet losses: approximately 860,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, over 6,000 tanks destroyed or damaged. 1,600 aircraft lost. German losses, approximately 200,000 casualties. Around 1,600 tanks and assault guns destroyed or damaged. 1,000 aircraft lost. The numbers are debated by historians, but all agree, Kursk was one of the bloodiest battles in history. But beyond the numbers, Kursk had profound strategic consequences. For Germany, the Battle of Kursk was more than a defeat, it was a turning point. Germany lost the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front, forever. Before Kursk, Germany could still launch major offensives, could still dictate the tempo of the war. After Kursk, Germany is permanently on the defensive. Never again would the German army launch a major offensive on the Eastern Front. The losses in tanks and aircraft are catastrophic. Germany's industrial base cannot replace them quickly enough. The Tiger and Panther tanks, which Hitler had waited for, proved less decisive than hoped. They were powerful but mechanically unreliable, slow, and fuel-hungry. From this moment forward, they would fight not for victory, but for survival. Most critically, Germany's best units, the elite panzer divisions, the SS divisions, were worn down. These forces, which had seemed invincible, were now just shadows of their former strength. For the Soviet Union, Kursk is a vindication. The Red Army has proven it can defeat the Germans in a prepared defensive battle. Soviet generals Zhukov, Rokossovsky, Vatutin, Konyev have outthought and outfought their German counterparts. Soviet industry, relocated beyond the Urals, is now producing tanks, aircraft, and guns faster than the Germans can destroy them. Soviet morale soars. The soldiers who stopped the Germans at Kursk know they can beat them anywhere. From Kursk onward, the Red Army will advance westward, relentlessly, pushing the Germans back across Ukraine, Poland, and eventually into Germany itself. After Kursk, the Soviet advance becomes unstoppable. September 1943, the Red Army crosses the Dnieper River, one of the great natural barriers of the Eastern Front. German defenses crumble. November 1943, Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, is liberated. Winter 1943-44, the Soviets push into Belarus, encircling German forces, reclaiming territory. 1944, the pace accelerates. Leningrad is relieved. The Baltic states are liberated. Operation Bagration destroys Army Group Center. By January 1945, the Red Army stands on the Oder River, just 40 miles from Berlin. Every victory traces back to Kursk, the moment when Germany's offensive power was broken, when the balance of the war shifted permanently. Kursk was not just a clash of numbers. It was a clash of tactics, technology, and philosophies of war. German tactics. Germany still relied on combined arms warfare, tanks, infantry, air support working together. But at Kursk, this system met its match. The Tigers and Panthers were formidable, but they had weaknesses. Mechanically unreliable. Many broke down before reaching combat. Slow. They couldn't exploit breakthroughs. Fuel-hungry. Germany's fuel supplies were stretched thin. The Ferdinand tank destroyer was powerful but flawed. No machine gun meant it was vulnerable to close assault. Soviet tactics. The Soviets perfected defense in depth. Multiple defensive belts ensured that even if the Germans broke through one line, they faced another, then another. Soviet anti-tank tactics evolved. Pack fronts, massed anti-tank guns, could destroy even Tigers. Soviet armor tactics also improved. At Prokhorovka, the mass charge was costly but effective. It negated the Germans' range advantage. Soviet artillery was used with devastating effect. God of War, they called it. Concentrated barrages destroyed German positions, disrupted attacks, demoralized troops. Air power. The air war at Kursk was massive. Both sides committed thousands of aircraft. German Stukas and ground attack planes provided close support but faced intense Soviet anti-aircraft fire. Soviet Il-2 Sturmovix, heavily armored ground attack planes, proved devastating against German tanks and infantry. For the first time, the Soviets achieved something close to air parity. The Luftwaffe could no longer dominate the skies. Behind the statistics, behind the tank numbers and casualty figures were human beings, millions of them. German soldiers, many of them veterans of years of brutal fighting, faced their toughest battle. Letters home speak of exhaustion, of the relentless Soviet defenses, of the feeling that no matter how hard they fought, the enemy kept coming. Soviet soldiers, defending their homeland, fought with desperation and courage. They knew what was at stake. If the Germans broke through, the war might be lost. Every position had to be held. Tank crews on both sides faced nightmarish conditions. Inside a tank in summer, temperatures could reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The noise was deafening. The smell of cordite, fuel, and sweat was overwhelming. When a tank was hit, the crew had seconds to escape before ammunition exploded or fuel ignited. Many died trapped inside burning hulks. Medics worked frantically to save the wounded. Field hospitals were overwhelmed. Thousands died from wounds that, in other circumstances, might have been survivable. Civilians in the Kursk region suffered terribly. Their homes became battlefields. Many fled. Others, unable to leave, hid in cellars while the battle raged above them. After the battle, the fields were carpeted with corpses, human and machine. It took months to clear the wreckage, years to rebuild. Kursk is often overshadowed by Stalingrad and other famous battles, but its strategic importance is immense. Stalingrad stopped the Germans. Kursk broke them. After Kursk, Germany's strategy shifted from conquest to survival. Every subsequent battle was defensive, delaying, trying to hold what remained. Kursk also demonstrated the effectiveness of Soviet intelligence and planning. The Soviets knew the attack was coming and prepared accordingly. This was no longer the Red Army of 1941, caught off guard and unprepared. This was a mature, professional force. Kursk showed the importance of logistics and production. The side that could replace losses faster had a decisive advantage. Soviet factories, working around the clock, outproduced German industry. Kursk influenced military doctrine for decades. The concept of defense in depth, of absorbing an attack and then counterattacking, became standard Soviet and later Russian strategy. Today, the battlefields of Kursk are quiet. The villages have been rebuilt. The fields are green again. But the memory endures. Memorials stand across the region. Monuments honor the Soviet soldiers who stopped the German advance. Museums display relics, rusted tanks, shell casings, personal effects. Veterans, now long gone, remembered Kursk as the hardest battle they fought. Harder than Moscow. Harder than Stalingrad. The sheer scale, the intensity, the stakes, all were unmatched. Kursk proved something to the world, that courage and determination can overwhelm even the most powerful war machines. That strategy and preparation can shatter even the fiercest assault. And that when two titans clash, only one will rise again. Kursk was the moment when the Soviet Union proved it could not only resist but could defeat Nazi Germany. It was the moment when Germany's fate was sealed. From Kursk, the road led westward through Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and finally to Berlin. Every mile of that road was bought with blood. But it began here at Kursk. In the summer of 1943, amid fire and steel, the Soviet Union stood its ground. And the course of World War II changed forever. July 1943. Two empires collide. 6,000 tanks. 2 million men. The fate of the world in the balance. The Germans believed their new weapons, their elite soldiers, their tactical brilliance would carry the day. They were wrong. The Soviets, prepared, determined, and fighting for survival, absorbed the blow and struck back with devastating force. Kursk was not just a battle. It was a turning point, a moment when the tide shifted irreversibly. Hitler's dream of conquering the East died in the fields around Kursk. Germany's offensive power shattered. The Red Army, ascendant. From this moment, there would be no more great German offensives. Only retreat, only defense, only delay. The road to Berlin began at Kursk. This was Kursk, the clash of the titans, the place where steel met steel, will met will, and only one side walked away victorious. In the summer of 1943, the world watched as two giants clashed. One fell, one rose, and the war would never be the same. This was Kursk, the greatest tank battle in history, the battle that broke the back of the Wehrmacht, and the moment when victory in the East became inevitable. We remember Kursk, not just as a battle, but as a testament to human courage, sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. The clash of the titans, forever remembered, forever honored.